Hello, and welcome back for another episode of Below the Line with Chris and Lizzie, hitting below the belt with all the hard questions. Yes, we are here with friend of the pod, Dave Chameides, Steadicam operator, crazy stories from the West Wing. Check out our other episode with Dave on his incredible Steadicam career. Lizzie, why don't you let our audience know what we're talking about with Dave today?
Well, today, friends, we're talking about safety. We're talking about the thing that the kids love to talk about, which is how to be safe on set. But it is actually, something that we're fascinated with and something that we talk about constantly on What Went Wrong. And Dave, you are a safety expert on set, as far as I understand. So if you could talk a little bit about your background with safety on set and what it is that you do.
Thank you. And thank you for doing this. Yeah, I'm definitely not a safety expert on set, but I've been involved in a lot of, actually was for a while the chair of the Local 600 Safety Committee. Local 600, by the way, for anybody not knowing, is the camera union, the camera guild. So it's like directors of photography, operators, assistants, etc. And we have had a safety push for a long time. So we have an app that we've created and we've created a number of videos and whatever. The thing is, anybody who's never worked on a set won't really understand that they have the potential to be the most unsafe places in the world. And I'm not talking about stunts. That's a whole nother thing. I'm just talking about regular day-to-day stuff, because there's equipment moving. There's, we're using my dolly has a hydraulic, arm on it that if you're not careful with, et cetera, et cetera. And 9 times out of 10, the big thing that we've found is that, most of the things that you run into that are problematic can actually be dealt with way, way before you ever get on set. And that's the best way to do it, to have options to do it. I'll give you one example. I'm a camera operator, so we're always being put in all sorts of different places. And a couple of years ago, a friend of mine called me up and he goes, I'm doing a shot in the front of a car today, and we're driving down a street, and it's a locked off street and whatever. And I'm leaning against the front of the front dash. And he goes, what happens if the airbag goes off? And I was like, oh my God. And I said, I never thought about that. He goes, I didn't either. And then all of a sudden I was like, those things are really hardcore. And I said, well, I don't know. And he goes, well, I think we should figure this out, because this is not a good thing. So actually I called up, some of the upper ups at the union, and I said to them, here's the deal. And I said, I want to grab some money and call one of these companies that does dummy tests and go down and put a camera on the shoulder of a dummy and blow the airbags and see what the hell happens. And that's exactly what we did. And we created a short video that's on the Local 600 safety page, which hopefully you guys can mention at the end, but anybody can Google Local 600 safety. It's outside of the firewall, and get all the videos that we've done, and see that. And it's the kind of thing that if you show it to a producer, they can never put someone in that position again because of what happened. And we actually got an expert from USC who basically explained how bad it would be, not only for the operator, but for the actors as well. But so there's a myriad of things. And truthfully, it's mundane and it's kind of boring and whatever. But the biggest thing that we all, on every single set, on every single show, fight is exhaustion, because we're sometimes working 12, 14 hours a day. And the big thing that nobody thinks about is you can work a 10-hour day, but because of our shift changes, you could work 8 to 6 and 8 to 6 and 8 to 6. And then you could come in at 6 o'clock and suddenly you're turning around, and people drive home tired. And a number of people, unfortunately, have fallen asleep and been killed doing this. So we have programs for that, but it's this kind of, it's all about the number of hours that we work, which is a real problem.
That is, and that's something that I'm embarrassed to say had never occurred to me, and until someone pointed out to me the number of people that die because they crash going home.
It's horrible.
It is horrible. You've been on so many sets. What have you seen is sort of the kind of red flags or telltale signs that maybe this is not a set where safety is being considered? Before you're in a situation where it's going to get bad, what are kind of the early signs?
I'm talking about union shows, which is what I work on, so I don't know about non-union shows. But the first AD is I don't want to say they're required, but it's become pretty standard for the first AD to have a safety meeting first thing in the morning. And if they don't do that, that's problematic. If they don't care about the hours and they go, what are, and because like we'll go up to them and go, hey, man, it's 12 hours. How long are we going today? Like, what's the deal? Because a lot of shows have gone, we're not working over 12 hours. And most people who aren't in the film industry hear that and they're like, 12 hours? And it's just like, bizarrely, that's a short day for us. I mean, or not a short day.
That's a good day. You wrap out in 12 hours. That's great. And you had everything that you needed.
But here's the dirty little secret about 12 hours, okay? When I say 12 hours, I'm saying shooting 12 hours. So add in an hour lunch, you're talking about 13 hours. Add in the load in to where you are and the load out. My assistants have to go probably half an hour on each side. So now you're at 14 hours. Let's look at hair and makeup and wardrobe. They're there 3 hours ahead of time sometimes, and they're there 3 hours afterwards. They'll sometimes work an 18-hour day. And people, there's all these, and you got Teamsters who were there. The trucks are there in the morning, and trucks are at the night. There's just so many people, and it's just at the end of the day, it's unsafe. I mean, it's one of the things that we've tried to do quite often is we try not to talk about long hours because anybody can go, well, I'll work long hours because I make more money, and it's like we try to make sure that people talk about them as unsafe hours because there are very few people who go, I want to work unsafe hours, but that's really what it is. And we have all sorts of Band-Aids for it, but it's a real problem. And then, if I'm on a set, I'll usually sort of take the temperature of the first AD when I get there and sort of, try to talk to him about different things. And before I even start, I will usually send an email out with that video that I mentioned and a couple other videos and go, hey, I just want to let you know about this so we're all on the same page. And if there's any driving stuff, if there's this and that and the other. And then, of course, unfortunately, after last year, there's a whole new thing on using guns on set, of course.
Yep.
2 years ago now, I think, actually.
And to really quickly to clarify, this was the filming of the movie Rust, which Alec Baldwin was the lead actor in, who fired a gun, was supposed to be not loaded or loaded with a blank.
It's supposed to be loaded with a dummy round, actually.
Dummy round, yeah. And the bullet fragments struck and killed the cinematographer, Helena Hutchins.
Yes, and injured the director as well.
And we actually immediately made, and it's also on that page, a video with Larry Zanoff, who's one of the top armorers in the business, explaining, because what I did to him was I said, look, I'm like a dyed-in-the-wool liberal who doesn't like guns, and I work around them all the time. I honestly don't know what I sort of know. Over the years, I've picked it up, but nobody's ever sat down and said, this is what you want to check for. And so we made a video, and I said, I want you to make a video for an idiot on set to know, A, what they should be checking, what they're seeing and what they're hearing and whatever. And also, the bigger thing to me is what to look for to know if the armorer knows what they're doing. Like, what are the red flags for that? And so, one of the things that he told me about, which I never thought of, was there has to be a chain of custody for the weapons, because either the weapon is locked up, it's in the hand of the actor, or it's in the hand of the armorer. I mean, another thing is, I at the beginning, I sort of, ignorantly was saying like, well, how many armorers do you need if you have 20 guns? And what if you have 30 guns? And he said, well, it's a ridiculous question, because the thing about it is, there has to be an armorer to step in at any moment and grab a gun that's misfiring or something like that. So if you have 5 guns, but they're all standing next to each other, you could theoretically have 1 or maybe 2 armorers. But if you have a gun here and a gun on a rooftop and a gun on a rooftop, you immediately have to have 3 armorers. So there were all sorts of things, like that. And unfortunately, the tragic death of Helena Hutchins kind of was a wake-up call. I actually, 6 months prior to that, shot a gun scene in that exact same church on that exact same property.
Wow.
But our set was run like clockwork with the weapons. It was a movie called The Harder They Fall. It was a Western. And just at the very beginning, our first AD, and you were asking, this is a perfect example. Our first AD, I remember, said, look, we're going to have a lot of gunfire on this show. And what I want to say is this: every time a gun comes out, everybody slows down. I don't care if we don't make our day. I don't care what happens. We're going to be safe. We're going to do this right. And I don't know how many thousands of rounds we fired off on that show, and there was not a single person hurt because we did it correctly. So, and the reality is, hopefully nobody will ever die that way again on a set, because the chances of getting shot on a set are minuscule because there are safety precautions in place, and unfortunately they weren't followed there. But next year, I don't know how many people are going to die driving home after a long day and fall asleep. So,
and to that point as well, you're talking about like what are the sort of cues to look for. You mentioned one of the first things being if they're not respecting your time, if they're not respecting the long hours.
Exactly
and my understanding is that that was very much the case on that set too. So
yes,
I guess an important thing, and this goes for everything, I feel like, but what I'm hearing from you is sort of like, if you see one thing, pay attention, because things will snowball, particularly on a set.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, you need to speak up. And what I always tell my crews now, I've been doing this for 33 years, is I go, look, when I was a year or two in the business, I didn't want to speak up because I didn't want to be the troublemaker. And I always tell them, I've been in this for 33 years, but I'm in there with the camera, and I have the tendency to go, let me get a little closer to the edge because I want that shot. And I'm not thinking the way that you're thinking, standing back 20 feet from me. So number one, if you see something, I need you to speak up. And number two is, if you're afraid of repercussions, tell me. And if I feel that it's valid, I will speak up on your behalf without your name. I don't care. And the other thing is, you can tell pretty quickly if an AD will say at the beginning, if there's a safety problem, I want to hear about it. If they set that up, and they got to obviously follow through on it, but if they set that up, that's an important thing. But one of the reasons why I love your podcast, besides the fact that it's fantastic, is you guys will actually. I remember on The Revenant, you were talking about how cold it was, and one of you was like, "Yeah, but what about the crew?" And it's just like, "Yeah, what about the crew?" And they got put through the ringer on that show, I know. But the thing is, everybody always wants answers, right? And the problem is, our business, one day we're doing this thing, and one day we're doing that thing, and one day we're on a building, and one day we're underground, and there's just so many things. And first of all, to have the idea that one person or two people are in charge of safety on a set, who are doing a full nother job, like an AD, like a key grip, those are usually the two people that people think about, is sort of ridiculous, right? Because it's like, yeah, the AD has nothing else to do, so he can look at it. It's your, or the key group doesn't have, so she can look at this. So it's just, they've got a full job to do. So, I mean, the answer, which is being talked about, and they're talking about legislation, is doing what they do in Australia, which is to have dedicated safety officers on set, to have the studios and production companies, whatever, pay a small percentage, or I don't know how they do it, into some fund that pays these people so they're autonomous. So that they can literally say, those cables over there need to be covered. No, I don't want to do it. I'm shutting this down. and they have the ability to do that. And
they have to be enabled with the authority, because that's the key. Is
they have to have autonomy.
Authority.
They have to have autonomy and authority. And the thing is, there's a lot of pushback from the Directors Guild, because there are a lot of people who say, well, I don't want to be told what to do, and I totally understand that. But at the same time, if we know that we're doing something,
I don't.
No. Let me rephrase that, because you're absolutely right. I'm not saying I understand them saying I don't want to be told not to do something that's unsafe. I think their concern is I don't want to give authority of my set to someone else. And it being abused or whatever. But at the same time, I always say, yeah, but if we're doing a shot and we point out that it's unsafe, then we're not going to do that shot. So this is just someone whose job it is to do that. But the bigger thing, and I've actually pitched this to a couple of people, and I'd love to see it get out there more, is you've got a script. There are people out there who work for insurance companies, whose job it is to do risk assessment. You could hire those people, and you could hire them on a one-off basis to read the script, and with each scene go 1 to 10, and 1 to 5 is like, yeah, there's not too much here, and 5 to 10 is like, hey, there's something serious. And you number each scene, and they read every rewrite, and then you can go through the script and go, okay, we got a 6 here. What's okay, we got a lion. Okay, how are we dealing with the lion or whatever? And then you deal with it all in prep, because the thing with me that always drives me nuts is when it gets to the point where I'm on a dolly and my dolly goes behind me and a boom guy's next to me and the assistant's there and whatever, and we're being asked to do something unsafe. I have to look at a director and say, I know this is what you want, but we can't do it. And to me, that's the single worst thing, because my job is to give the director exactly what they want. And what I always think at those points, and they're very rare, because usually what you do is you go, we can't do it this way, but we can do it this way. But if we could have talked about this a week ago and seen it ahead of time, then we would have gone, okay, there's going to be a problem with this. Here are the hurdles. How do you still want to tell your story as best you can without putting us in jeopardy? Because I don't really think anybody wants to put us in jeopardy. There are probably 2 producers out there who would like to put me in jeopardy, but that's a different thing. But it's that they don't have any choices at that point, because you're on the date. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah. Well, and the risk assessment, actually, the actuarial approach that you're discussing, right, where you're going, that actually is exactly how you budget a movie, by the way, and schedule a movie, which is you go through it and the line producer says, well, this scene alone is costing us X. And you, as the director, it's your job to go in and say, well, no, actually, I wasn't envisioning a real lion. It was going to be a puppet, for one shot. Oh, no, that scene's far less expensive. And it would be the same conversation of, oh, that scene's far less dangerous than... Yep. So we effectively have that system already in place. So it's an augmentation of an existing process, which is great. I love this idea.
Do me a favor,
I think it's
talk to everyone out there about it, because
it's what's funny is there's a movie I'm working on right now that I'm in that process on the budgeting side, and we're actually doing the same thing. We actually just removed all the guns. It's a vampire horror film. Okay. It's a comedy movie, and we had actually pulled the guns after there were not very many, but there were a few. But we've been now going through the scenes in a very detailed level with the stunt work that we're doing, and it's the same. It is not exactly what you're talking about, but it's like one permutation away from being what you're saying, which would be extremely helpful. And again, to your point of the safety regulators, I think to draw in all of these elements that you're talking about, Dave, and tell me where I'm getting this wrong, but in my mind, all of this comes down to time is the elusive, precious resource that you have on set. Studios don't want to give you more because it's expensive, because what everybody thinks is expensive on movie sets are the sets or the special effects or the CGI. What's expensive is labor. You have hundreds of people working and not getting paid some obscene amount of money. It's just that when you start stacking up hundreds of people every single day, it gets very expensive. Your run rate's very high. And it's very easy to and the problem is you have a subset of people like yourself, Dave, who once you put them in the job, they're actually willing to put themselves at risk to give you the best version of this movie or story possible. So the incentives are so perverse. Your employer has every reason to say, well, I'm going to shorten the time because I know you're going to kill yourself.
That's exactly right.
To try to deliver this movie for me. And that's why you need an independent arbiter of some kind.
That's exactly right. Yep. And
to exist as a friction in that system.
Well, and the reality is, we are our own worst enemies, because what happens is they constantly hand us these impossible tasks and we somehow pull them off. So next time they go, well, that was easy. We'll just do that again. And it's like, you don't know what was involved in that. So, there's that. And then there's the other thing is, like you said, and I mean, I hate to say it, but it's a reality. We will put ourselves in harm's way, only to a point, but we'll do things that maybe probably aren't that smart, like working 14 hours a day, because we love what we do and we want to be the best at what we do. And we don't ever want to say, we can't do this. Do you know? There's a lot of pride in that. And there's a lot of sort of there's a little bit of bravado, I guess, or whatever, but there's just the ability to say, no, we pulled that off, but it's a double-edged sword, right? So, some of the things that I would just say to the people who are listening are check out the Local 600 safety page, which is, if you just Google Local 600 safety, it'll come up the page, and it's got a ton of stuff on it. One of the big things that we worked on that's on there is I'm saying it wrong, but it's the crew bill of rights. It's basically how to discuss safety issues. And one of the key words that I usually use when we're not getting, we'll bring something up quiet. Hey, this is a problem. And if nobody's listening, I'll just look at them and go, look, here's the big concern. Number one, I'm concerned for the safety of my fellow workers and myself. If you just say yourself, you're actually closing yourself off to OSHA problems down the road. If you say if you're worried about everybody or any number of people, it's a different thing. And then also you just go, I think you guys are putting yourself in a position of liability if we do this. And then suddenly...
That's the one that people perk up at.
It's literally like there are times where I want to get on set and just scream, liability, and like see what happens.
Yeah.
Because the second you say that, people go, whoa, wait a minute. We don't want to put ourselves in a liability, you know?
And for someone who doesn't know, like, you know, particularly being a young person on a set, I think it can be hard to know sort of what the resources are and also like what the chain of command is. So if someone is on set and doesn't know who to talk to or who to say, like, this looks like a liability, or, you know, I think everyone is unsafe. Like, what are sort of the steps they need to take? Who do they go to first? And how does that get handled?
I mean, assuming that they are comfortable with it, they should go to the first AD. If they're not comfortable with it, they should go to their department head. So like a camera assistant can come to either the director of photography or the camera operator. Director of photography is the head of our department. Like, you know, a grip could go to the key grip, electrician go to the gaffer, whoever the head of their department is, which probably is a better way to go. But, you know, sometimes the thing is you will go to those people and they'll go, it's no problem. And then you're like, well, what do I do now? And here's the thing that I always tell people is there are times when you're going to have to make a decision. And it's not going to be an easy decision. But if you are certain that there's a real problem going on, you may have to do something that will jeopardize your job. But it's going to be a lot better than calling someone's better half, loved one, whatever, and saying, I was there and this is what happened. And usually when I explain that to people, something kicks in, because it's like you're not going to carry that lost job with you for the rest of your life, but you're going to carry with you, I could have stopped that and I didn't. And I mean, I've been in some very close calls because I was young and stupid, and was doing things that I shouldn't have done. And I've been lucky enough to you know, have gotten through those things. But sometimes it's not even that. There was a show, I don't remember what show it was, but a DP was telling me that they had a shot where a camera was in front of a car and the car was supposed to pull right up to the camera and stop. And did it, no problem. And the guy didn't get out of the car, and they opened the car and he had had a heart attack. And if it had happened 5 seconds earlier, it would have taken that camera operator now. So when we do a shot like that now, I always go, look, it's got to be a lock off, or we do it with a remote head, which we usually have now. There are like 6 different ways to do that shot now where I'm not standing there. And people are, well, what do you know, and thankfully we've gotten a little bit past this whole, what are you, chicken? And it's just like, and I used to go, yeah, I'm completely chicken. And I'm fine with that. Like, I don't really need you to be impressed with me, but I do need to go home tonight and see my kids. So, you know, and now I'm at the point where I'm like, look, if you want to fire me, you can fire me, but we can't do this shot this way. Here are 3 other ways we can do the shot. And the reason we can't do exactly what you want is because nobody talked about this ahead of time. And had I been there, I would have, and I'm sorry. But, you know, this is something that we have to deal with. We can't ignore it, you know.
Let's say, like, in a worst case scenario, someone goes to their department head and then they go to, the department head says, it's fine.
Yeah.
They go to the first AD. First AD says, not a big deal. Yeah. At that point, are they done? Or, like, is there another resource they can go to?
At that point, you can call your union and get a union rep in there. And I mean, look, I can't speak for every union. Local 600 is very good. We actually created an app that you can actually report these things on. And I've had people call up production and go, hey, I'm hearing from set right now that this is going on. I'm coming down there. You guys need to stop. And they won't necessarily make them stop, but that lets see at that. And by the way, I guarantee you, they use the word liability. But at that point, the producers are going, "Well, what's going on? We got okay. Well, everybody's got to. What's happening?" And everything slows down, because the key to 90% of this is just to stop the train long enough for everybody to take a breath and go,
and
okay,
think about
what
it.
are we doing here? You know, and that's why, by the way, the email that I usually send to my crews ahead of time is I go, look, I've been doing this a long time, and people seem to think that I have some special knowledge of safety. I really don't. I just have been doing this long enough that I know what to look for. I know what the signs are. And that said, I can do really stupid stuff just because my head is so in the shot. So I need you to keep an eye on me, just like I'm going to keep an eye on you. And I mean, you know, it's unfortunately not enough, but anytime we're on a split or on a late night, our crew, or at least the camera crew, will check in with every single person and say, are you okay to drive home? Of course, everybody says yes, because we all want to sleep on our own things. But there have been twice where I've taken people aside and said, you are not okay to drive home. You're getting a hotel room. They're, you know, because production will do that a lot of times, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to fight with them because everybody thinks they're okay until they're not. There's also on the way on the safety page, there's another really good video that my friend John Lindley made on unsafe hours that talks to people who have driven home, and it's always, I was 10 blocks from home and then I woke up, you know, and it's just it's horrible. And the reason why he's so invested in it is because he was the DP on Pleasantville. And his assistant, Brent Hirschman, went home after a 19-hour day, drove home. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was going home for his daughter's birthday. And he was killed in a car accident.
No.
And John has never been the same since. And he's fought long hours, unsafe hours, I should say, more than anybody else that I know. And it's a personal, crusade for it. And We've gotten better turnaround. We've gotten like weekend turnarounds. They're starting to come back around, but it's still not enough.
And to clarify, just so the audience understands, turnaround refers to the duration of time that needs to be given between the wrap of one day and the call time. So when you're supposed to be on set for your next day.
Exactly.
But to be clear, the turnaround time is not universal for all crew and cast. And so what's interesting is that for some crew, your turnaround time can be very short, sub 8 hours in certain instances, sometimes depending.
Insane.
And then, but for key cast members, you can't unless you force them, you can't turn someone around shorter than, 12 hours in some instances for your top build cast. So film is still very hierarchical. And even though progress has been made with some, specific groups, on set, it's not been done. There needs to be a more universal approach. And again, what Dave mentioned is the part of the issue that we run into is the staggering effect of, well, if you want to start at 9, we got to get load in at 4. The Teamsters got to get going at 3:30, and hair and makeup's going to come in at 5:30, and and so it's complicated logistically, but it's just not worth it to risk anybody's life to make a movie.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody goes into it going, if we lose a couple of people, it'll be all right, because people just assume it's not going to happen. And you're right about the difference in turnaround with different people. But the thing is, as an operator, I get, depending on location and this and that, the other, I think I get 11 hours now. Now, my assistants, I think, generally get 10. But the thing is, they can come in a little bit before me, but there's no way that they can come in that much before me because there's nothing to be done. And then the big thing, and that I always respect, is I respect the actors who go, I'm not going to waive my turnaround because this crew needs rest. We're not going to do that.
Yes. Well, that's a good thing. So the studio will oftentimes push an actor to waive their turnaround, and they'll just say, fuck you, because they're the one person that can on
but
set.
I've had them go, no, we're not doing this. This crew is tired. We're going home.
We're getting some
usually
sleep.
They're executive producer actors, but I have great respect for those people because they look around and people are just falling asleep. I mean, I'm not going to say what show, but there was a big show that I did where our final day was a 6th day, and it was a 15-hour day. And by the time that we finished, as the sun was coming up, there were people who were falling over in their chairs because they were falling asleep, and I had to be doing some massive shot, and and it's just you're not firing on all cylinders. There's no way. There's no way. I mean, I think the end of that week, I must have worked a 75 hour week that week, and when I was 20, I could do that. I'm 53 now. It doesn't work as well. And I get really angry. So most people try not to make that happen with me.
Also, I mean, you're not going to get the highest quality product if people are falling asleep in their chairs.
Thank you. Well, John Lindley, the gentleman I told you, always says to me, show me one other industry in the world where they'll pay you twice as much money because we're on overtime to get half the quality of work. And he's right. And and it gets exponential. And I've had people go, I mean, it hasn't happened in a long time, but like in the 15th and 16th hour, it's like, why can't you nail the shot? And I look at them and I go,
oh my
because
God.
I've been working for 15 hours. And, I look at them and I go, anybody else who's putting on a 50-pound Steadicam, feel free to step up here. But I'm pretty tired, And, it's the reality of this business. But, we try to limit it. And especially as a union, every time we renegotiate our contracts, we try to get a little better and a little better with the hours, but it's a really tough thing. The one thing that I've heard in the past, there's been this, you've probably heard of this 12 on, 12 off thing where it's like we should work for 12 and we should have 12 hours off. And personally, I still think that's too much, but that's another story. But
I agree.
Yeah, and the
That's
thing is,
not that much.
no, it isn't. And I mean, that's how brainwashed we are. That people are like 12 hours, that'd be great. And one of the weird things is I've worked on shows where it's a 10-hour day and that's it. And especially after COVID, there was a 10-hour day for a while. But then there were people who were complaining that they weren't getting the overtime and they weren't making enough money. So there's a delicate balance. But the one that I've heard that makes the most sense to me is hours worked equals hours off. And so if you work an 11-hour day, you have to have 11 hours. I think actually the thing was it has to be minimum of 12 hours, but more. But so if something happens where you have to work a 16-hour day, then you get 16 hours off. And obviously you'd have to have weekend turnaround so they didn't mess with that. But if on Monday you work 16 hours, then by Tuesday you're coming in 16 hours later, and by Wednesday it just screws everything. So there's a built-in mechanism for making sure that you don't mess that up. But I don't know what the magic answer is. I mean, I think the reality is there are many shows that I've worked on where they've just gone, we don't need as much coverage as we're getting. We can do this in 10, 11 hours. And there's a mandate to the directors to not get every single shot.
Yeah, it's a reconceptualization of what your movie's going to be. Yeah. And that could be on a big movie. It could be a studio saying, well, I'm reconceptualizing how much it's going to cost and we're going to spend more money and get more days because you have the resources. Or if you're on a small movie, it's going to be, hey, guess what? We're doing that organic wide that Dave suggested by putting the camera in the corner. And you have to make a sacrifice at one end or the other. There's that triangle of cheap, fast, and good. Pick two, and you can't, you can't square that.
And it isn't always even a sacrifice. I mean, sometimes being limited that way makes you think smarter and go, "Oh, I found a much better way to tell this story." So
absolutely.
that and there's this, and I will say, especially in TV. Now that writers have become executive producers, you've got the director going, I want this. And the writer's going, but let's get that and that too, because I really like that. And they're executive producers. So it's like suddenly you're shooting several shots. And I mean, I'll tell you on Ozark, Jason Bateman was our executive producer showrunner. And there are times where he'd come up and be like, no, you don't need a shot back on me. Everybody knows what I look like. It's one line. It'll be fine. I'm the one who's doing the final cut anyway. Trust me. You don't need this. Let's move on. And, to have someone in that seat who knows that much, it makes a big difference and it moves things along. So, sometimes you need that.
Well, Dave, thank you very, very much for joining us. If I've learned one thing today, it's that I absolutely could not hold a 40 to 50 pound weight for 14 to 16 hours. So God bless you.
I'll tell you, by the way, on the movie Psycho Cop Returns, which I'm sure both of you saw and enjoyed. If you didn't, you probably should.
Absolutely.
Of course, you probably have a poster somewhere there in the room. I had a Panavision camera that was too heavy for the rig, so the whole thing probably weighed about 65 pounds. And I remember I fell asleep leaning against a wall, holding the camera in between takes. And the only way that I knew was I started to slide and my assistant slammed me back against the wall. And I remember, but I was like 21 and I remember thinking, this is amazing.
Only when you're 21.
Oh, how stupid we are. Yeah.
Truly. Yeah. Well, thank you again. This was really insightful and I think honestly so helpful. I hope that people listen to this and understand what they should be looking for, who they should be talking to, how to advocate for themselves. So thank you very, very much for everything that you're doing.
Thank you. And by the way, I totally appreciate you guys taking the time to make this part of this because it's so important. And if no other reason, maybe more crew members will come and listen to your podcast, as they should, because it's hands down the best podcast in the
world. Even better on take two. Guys, please, you can also go check out icg600.com/safety for more information that Dave talked about, including the Safety Bill of Rights. And a lot of, I think the landscape is going to change in the next few years. We're going into another writer's strike now, and I'm hopeful that things are going to start to shift in more positive directions in terms of safety and equity and whatnot. But in the meantime, I think the best thing that all of us that work on film sets can do is no matter what our role is on the film, be the eyes and ears of those around you, as Dave mentioned, because there are people doing jobs on set who are unable to watch themselves, obviously. And so it is up to their coworkers, and that could be you or me or any number of people out there, to keep an eye out and make sure things are always above board. But Dave, thank you again for coming on our show. We deeply appreciate it. And guys, I know you don't believe us, so listen to Dave when he says that this is hands down the best podcast out there. And
well, also listen to Dave when he says, take care of yourself.
Yes, do both.
But mostly for his podcast recommendations. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to our patrons. Until next time, it has been What Went Wrong.
Bye.
Go to patreon.com/whatwentwrongpodcast to support What Went Wrong and gain access to bonus episodes, video content, and more. What Went Wrong is a Sad Boom podcast presented by Lizzie Bassett and Chris Winterbauer. Editing and music by David Bowman, with cover art from Euthana Uos.